Welcome, viewers or listeners, however you are viewing or listening to this, to Assiduous Dust, home of the OTSCE On the Spot Collaborative Poem. This is episode number 13.5, because you know what? Why not? And we have with us today Doug Holder, and later we have Matt Cedillo. Doug, I am so glad to have you on. Listeners, viewers, you are in for a treat. I'm just so psyched. First off, I want to just say a little bit, let me check my cheat sheet and say a little bit about Doug. Doug Holder founded the Ibbetson Street Press in Somerville, Massachusetts with Dianne, please correct me if I mispronounce.
Robitaille,
and Richard Wilhelm. Holder has had numerous collections of poetry published. His most recent, The Essential Doug Holder, New and Selected Poems, published with Big Table Publishing. Holder teaches creative writing at Endicott College in Beverly, Massachusetts, and he has received a citation from the Massachusetts State House of Representatives for his work as a professor, publisher, editor, and poet in 2015. Super groovy. He's also received the Allen Ginsberg Award from the Newton Writing and Publishing Center. The Doug Holder Papers collection is housed at the University at Buffalo. He's been a longtime arts editor of the Somerville Times. Check it out, it's very groovy. All this stuff is groovy.
You're going to be in it.
Yeah. Whoa. Okay. Yeah. As well as the curator at the Newton Free Library Poetry Series. Just so much. He holds Holder's audio-visual interviews with poets and writers. Those are housed at the Harvard University Libraries, as well as in the Cid Corman Collection at University of Massachusetts, Boston. His work has been published widely in journals, so many journals. These are just a few. Rattle, Cafe Review, Toronto Quarterly, South Florida Poetry Journal, Constellations, damn, I'm jealous, Worcester Review, and elsewhere. He holds an MA in English and American Literature and Language from Harvard University. Doug, listeners, viewers, let's give a over-the-top round of applause for Doug Holder.
Thank you.
So, Doug, it's a pleasure to have you on, and you've accomplished so much, and from the get-go. And my first question to you is: Did you always know that you were on this path for literature? And what brought you? And this might be kind of a multi-part question that might set a theme. What brought you towards this path? And if you could perhaps maybe share just a couple experiences or a few people that helped support you, or yeah.
I think I always knew that I wanted to be a writer, and I envisioned myself being a struggling writer, which I was and probably still am, in an urban area, New York, Greenwich Village, or something like that, because I grew up in New York. But I first in 1975, when I was an undergraduate at University of Buffalo, I met Allen Ginsberg, and I really didn't know who he was. The guy at the radio station I was working at, college radio station.
A dude with a beard.
He's a prophet, he said. And I said, he looked like an uncle of mine, an old Jewish uncle of mine with a long beard. And I walked up to him, and I was a sort of rosy-faced, with a corduroy patch jacket, Mr. Prep. And he was there surrounded by all these other guys who looked kind of seedy. And he said, "Mr. Ginsberg, can I can I have you on my show? And they all started snickering around him. God knows it could have been Gregory Corso or whatever. And
That makes sense.
he was very polite. He said, "I'm going to a party tonight, but I'm, it's nice that you asked me. I would have gone if I didn't have a party, whatever." So then I found out more about Ginsberg, and then I was one day when I was back in Boston, I was working as a store manager downtown of some place, and on my lunch break, I just happened to see this book. It seemed interesting. It had an interesting cover. It was called On the Road by Jack Kerouac, of course, and I read it. And
never heard of it.
Never heard of it, right?
Yeah.
And it just opened up, my interest into all the beat poets, and then branching off from there into a lot of American literature. Eventually, I got my master's at Harvard, and dealing with Jewish American literature, because I'm Jewish and I've always been interested in that. And but I was, yeah, as you are, and I always was. I always was keeping journals, and when I saw a good piece of writing, I've kept journals for over 20 years. I see a good piece of writing, I'd write it down. If I had an idea or something,
Do you ever go back to some of them?
Sorry?
Do you ever go back to some of them from time to time?
Oh, I go back to them. Once when we were having a huge snowstorm here in Boston and no one could get out, it was so bad. It was probably around 4 or 5 years ago. I was sort of like, in a fever-like state, and I started going back to my journals and writing poems from the old days of Boston when I was here in the 70s, and it just came out. It was almost like automatic writing, and I did Portrait of an Artist as a young poseur. I was living in a rooming house in Boston at that time, and I had all the affectations of a poet. In fact, a little too much, but actually, what you pose at first, I find if you stick with it, you become it, and so
right, yeah, and you embody it.
You embody it, exactly, yeah. So yeah, I think I've been a poet, one way or the other.
Before you knew it.
Yeah, before I knew it, but I think I was, at that sensibility. My uncle, David Kirschenbaum, was a rare book dealer in New York. He started out with push carts on the Lower East Side, and then he became a really celebrated rare book dealer. He had the Carnegie bookstall in Book Row in Manhattan. So we always had books around us. He would send us books, and so I was surrounded by that atmosphere. A lot of booksellers in my family.
Yeah, and you got to make sure that they don't topple over and you get crushed and squashed.
Well, the interesting anecdote about that.
It's more than you can read also. It's far more. A lot of the times it's like you pick one up, you read something, and it's like,
Well, the anecdote my Uncle Dave used to tell me was that he worked for a lot of industrialist bibliophiles, for instance, would come to him. He said, "Look, my wife said, one more book and you're out." So he would go there and get their libraries in Austin, Texas, or whatever, and university libraries and things like that. So he told me that was an interesting anecdote.
That quite is, and it's so. I'm curious. So, well, let's take it out. So what year is this? Around this is going back a bit. So in between that, for let's say, then you went to Harvard, right?
But that wasn't until I was like 40 years old. So I had been working at a psychiatric institute in Boston, McLean, which actually is a literary landmark where Anne Sexton, Sylvia Plath, Robert Lowell did their time there. And there I was at working as a counselor, which I guess is, not, in the old days they would call it an orderly, but it was, mostly kids who were out of college and wanted to get some experience, and I did it for a long time. I saw a Waking in the Blue, which was from Robert Lowell, which talked about a poem that talked about his experience in the mental hospital, his famous line, "We all hold locked razors." And I saw that and I said, this is a wonderful poem. And at that time, Robert Pinsky was having his American Favorites Poems project. So I took that poem and wrote an introduction. Pinsky liked it, and it was in there. And so that really, started me even more. And I
Yeah,
started running poetry groups for psychiatric patients for many years on
and
locked
that's
wards.
yeah, and what's really important is taking initiative and not being because there's this constant fear of failure or fear of not enough. And I think this doesn't just extend for poets, but for all people as well, of which poets are people. And so, how has that shifted you throughout the years, and especially in those in some of your early formative years? I guess in a way, all our years are formative years in a way. They constantly guides us. But how is that?
Right. How is
How
that?
have
What?
you dealt?
How
Yeah,
is? Just re-clarify that. I'm sorry.
yeah. How have you dealt with fear? Okay,
Fear of
so
failure.
yeah, and imagine you're like there's some person who's a newbie that wants to branch out or certain things. They're plagued by fear, and
Well, Samuel Beckett said, "Fail and fail better." I
right.
mean, I think it's
So
the
tell
only.
us about some times where you failed and then you failed better.
Oh, yeah, that would be interesting. I think, well, for instance, the poetry groups at McLean, when I first went into doing it, I said, well, these people want to hear Howl by Allen Ginsberg, about madness and screaming,
They want the big
scream,
stuff.
screaming down Negro streets that don't, And so I read it and I was all psyched. I said, oh, yeah, I'm really going to be like relating to them. And they didn't want to hear it. They said, well, look, we're suffering enough. Why do we have to hear this shit? And so I realized that, sometimes what's on my agenda is not necessarily on your audience's agenda. Okay. And so I thought, I was kind of more self-centered then. And then I realized that, you're dealing with something bigger than yourself.
Right. And there's a notion, what comes to mind, I jump around here, is there's this notion of fauna, and faunaphilia is like the forgetting of forgetting. I'm not, in just comes to mind for some reason, in Sufi tradition. And there's this meditation, this forgetting of forgetting, and the kind of thing that poetry in a way is a way of life, I guess. So we kind of like forget, we kind of branch out and this is something I've found, and I'm curious, I realize this is a long interlude, like poets are very generous and care. There's something almost of a, yeah, let's support, let's uplift. And I'm just curious your thoughts on that, as well as how you've shifted as you've worked with.
I just think I would, I'm not being immodest, but
Okay.
from the time I was 20 to now at 65, I think my
Oh,
craft
you're
has
a
got
liar.
better.
You're clearly 45.
Right. And my craft has been improved. But I think the same concerns are the same concerns that I dealt with, people on the margins and urban settings, et cetera, et cetera. They've stayed the same. They've stayed the same. I wouldn't call myself a poet of uplifting, but a poet of observing, of the observation, the human condition. I'm not writing about flowers blooming in the spring. That's nothing wrong with that. But
But in a way, it's uplift by pointing out things as they are, in a way, or surfacing. Maybe unsurfacing is a better term.
Right. So that's how I view it. I haven't changed in my subject matter. I just hope that I've changed in my craft. Well, I'm not as heavy-handed and.
And do you feel that would you share with us perhaps one of your earlier pieces from when you were perhaps something, or particularly, would you let us in to your world. You're at the doing counseling. Do you have a piece about that?
Yeah, I have poems from the psychiatric ward.
Yes.
And from my new book, actually, The Essential Doug Holder.
Beautiful. Would you give a whole, kind of the beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. Well, howl us away.
All right, so let's see. I'm sorry, I have to find it. Okay. This is from my first book. Some poems here. From Poems of Boston and Just Beyond, from the Back Bay, which is a section of Boston where I lived in a rooming house, to the back ward where I work. So I could read First Night on the Psychiatric Ward when I first worked there in 1982. That's when I started.
Sounds groovy.
First Night on the Psychiatric Ward. The night seemed perfectly cast, stormy, thunder and rain. The patient was biblical, long hair and a beard with staff at his command. He put a paternal hand on me and called me his finest creation. What could I do but thank him? He smiled with divine patronization. Undoubtedly, I was a much valued acolyte. Then suddenly a flash from the storm lit the building in a momentary spectral glow. A clap of thunder howled down the locked ward. He looked at me like a proud teacher, patting me on the back. Good work, kid, good work. So I was sort of a minor god that he created.
Yeah, no, I got that. And that,
so he's proud of me.
You read that line of the spectral glow? The
spectral glow, yeah. The momentary spectral glow.
Oh, yeah, suddenly. And that's, do you remember that moment of like, it's interesting, the notion of this suddenly, and it seems very spiritual in a way. And suddenly is a very, it's a spiritual term. I think it indicates something all of a sudden, suddenly, something appears, a different viewpoint. And I wonder that, there's usually, grounded in place is really important, I think, in poetry and in literature in general. And I wonder that, I guess, what place is there that you don't escape? I guess you don't escape yourself in a way. And so have you, when you read these, do you visualize or image those works and that you see yourself in a different way over the years?
Well, I was very much a newbie, right? And to see this delusion or psychosis, and it was a revelation for me about how delusional or psychotic a person could be. But I could see how they might be thinking if they weren't thinking in their right frame of mind. You and I would just see a storm, but they see it as some divine intervention, and that they are in charge of it, which is an interesting way to think of it.
Yeah, no, there is some, I guess there's a tiny bit of beauty in that also. There's some beauty.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah, sure there's beauty in that, yeah. Yeah. I have my own ugly beauty,
Oh, come on, that beard, man.
No, I meant the ugly, I didn't mean my looks. I'm stunningly good looking. But I meant my poetry.
Yeah. And so, I found that, talking about for Judaism, I'm part of the True Blue Jew crew. I'm Jewish as well, ish. And I found that for me, like, I'm just want to share a little bit. One day I just got like I call it a Hasidic literature text. I was anonymously subscribed to it, and I just get these daily or regularly. I started sometimes like reading them, and then I'll like go into some poetry or whatnot. It's kind of influenced, and it's been really interesting in watching these videos and whatnot. And I'm curious how, if your Judaism or any of your practices end up influencing your poetry, not just your subject matter and perhaps even your craft.
Well, I was a Reform Jew,
Mhm.
and as my grandfather, who came from the shtetl of sentence, shtetl from the Pale of Settlement, said, that's a branch of Nazism. Little joke there. He didn't like it, and so I'm not a religious Jew, and so most of
I
my
grew up Reform as well.
yeah, and so but I'm very cultural Jew. I'm a New York Jew, and I was steeped in the culture of
Yeah, I'm in LA too.
delicatessens and all that stuff. Right. I'm not, I don't know how the LA Jewish scene is, but New York is, has its own, sensibility. And I was, I grew up with the uncles and the arguing and the food and the kishkas and
The Michiganer.
and the chopped liver and the guilt, the neurosis, all that. So I'm very much Jewish in that sense, in terms of like, do I daven or do I go to, synagogue? I haven't really been that kind of Jew, but I strongly feel Jewish and feel attached to that culture.
Right, and that's what's important is identity. I think is so important and it deeply interrelated to what we do, maybe indirectly. And are there points that you studied also of with Jewish American Jewish literature as well. You looked
Yeah, in
at.
fact, I did my thesis. I was working at the mental hospital. I didn't go to day school or anything. I went to night school, like extension school at Harvard, and I got my master's there. And I went and I studied with a Harvard professor, Ruth Weiss, who worked with that famous Jewish scholar, and now his name is, the world we live in. He did this thing on the Jewish immigrants coming to New York. But anyway, I did it on Henry Roth. I don't know if you're familiar with Henry Roth.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote Call It Sleep. And they also wrote a trilogy about a young kid coming over from Russia and living in the Lower East Side and trying to assimilate into the culture. And I took the viewpoint of how you could trace his assimilation through the food he ate. When he symbolically threw a salami in the Hudson River and embraced the Goyish pork chop in order to free himself from that, that frock Jew image from Eastern Europe. So yeah, that's very much part of how I view things. Yeah, a cultural Jew. Yeah.
Yeah. So
okay.
Regarding with cultural Judaism, and again, there's something interesting about it, and I'm I've been also learning more of different poets, for example, like Sevi. Sometimes I'm really bad at pronouncing names. Sling, I'm not sure. And there's some Jewish poets that also contemporary Jewish poets that are important, and it's interesting because I find that though I might not be Jewish as much from like, okay, like I don't go too much to synagogue of certain things. I think there's also this internal Judaism that's important to realize. And there's also an internal side of poetry. And I think that, I don't know, maybe there's a similarity there. There's something, an attitude or something going on.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's an attitude. It's a mixture of New York and Yiddish. I don't know what it is. It's a New York sensibility.
Oh, yeah.
It's something that you really can't put your hand on, but it's there. Yeah. I mean, for instance, I moderate a writers group online, Zoom, and There's some people who come from a totally different background than I do, and I'm sort of like, I sort of run a moderation. Like we used to be a regular physical meeting place called the Bagel Barts, and we met and talked writing and anything else, and it was chaotic, and that's how I wanted it in a way, because if you ever seen the Woody Allen movie where they all these comedians gather every Saturday morning for bagels at Zabar's, and they're interrupting each other and having a great time, joking and all that. But some people don't like that. Some people grow up in cultures where they are very much more
messy is good,
prim and proper. Messy. It's a messy thing. And some people don't like it that way.
Good messy. There's a certain thing, and similarly also, I guess, with poetry, you need a little mess. Sometimes if something's a little too perfect, you might this is something.
Yeah, but not to say I'm not denigrating anyone else's style, but I'm just saying it is a certain style. I mean, if you want to try to define the sensibility of New York Jew, I mean that there is a book. I don't know if you ever read it. Yeah, I forget the author's name. It's called The New York Jew. I think it's Kazan wrote it. I haven't read it. Take a look at it. You should read it. Yeah.
Write that down.
The New York Jew, and it talks a lot about the Jewish intellectuals of the 50s and 60s. Yeah.
Right. So I'm curious about. So you tell me a bit about what would you say that was most essential or defining, how do I put this? Defining aspects. We said that one of the defining things, we pinpointed, at least two different ones. Working in the ward, doing that, and meeting Ginsberg, that you'd say are probably two. Can you tell us a bit later down the road, or in between, another particular defining event that I think shaped in terms of connections with other poets, perhaps even leading to your establishing of Ibbetson Street Press, if you could talk about.
Well, I mean, I think one thing I did is that I needed to feel more legit as a writer, and so I went to night school to get an advanced degree, and I studied with a lot of great people, and I did a lot of scholarly work, and I felt when I graduated, it was sort of like I said, now I wanted a credential, and also I wanted to learn something. I needed more. I was a history major in college. So, and then, forming the Ibbetson Street Press back with Richard Wilhelm and Dianne Robitaille, my wife, that it was a calculated move. I mean, I was interested in poetry magazines and I was submitting, but also I wanted to, the best way to attract people, poets, and get to meet them is have a show like yours or a magazine. And things like that. It's
an icebreaker in a way, I guess.
Yes. So, and then I started interviewing poets. I have, for 20 years, I've interviewed poets and on the
Who's your most TV favorite show that you've ever interviewed? Is there someone that ever is like, whoa? Or your
it's interesting. One interesting one was I interviewed Israel Horovitz. About him, right? He was brought up on the sex charges. His Beastie Boys. He was the father of the Beastie Boys and all that. He was a playwright. And just after I interviewed him, he was brought up on these huge sex scandals. So, but the reason I interviewed him was because he had his first book of poetry out, and he was a very accomplished man, screenwriter and playwright and all that. So that was interesting. In terms of people blowing me away, like I said, if that one experience with Kerouac, I was blown away. I was a certain age that I read it now. It's interesting because if I read it now, I'm not, guy's doing a lot of drugs and running around. I mean, but when I was reading it then, I was thrilled because I was sort of, manager trainee in a pharmacy, and I was constrained in this very conventional life, and
Right.
and
I didn't know that there was this opening and kind of like
right,
blown open.
right. So it was, it was a wonderful thing.
Yeah, and I think that it's important is can we find, sometimes we need some restraint, but also we need to be blown wide open. And it's interesting that life kind of has that aspect that it's almost like you peel layers of the onion of yourself when you look back and you look at different things in life. And there are certain aspects where we're like, oh, I was this amount onion peeled. And then you look back on that exact moment later on and you're like, no, I wasn't that peeled. There was
But
so
I think
much onion there.
if you look at writers now, for instance, Patti Smith, there's a moment when that you could, it could just be, it's just a chaotic, it's just a moment, an ordinary moment, but you can make it into what you see as an epiphany. For instance, Patti Smith wanted to be an artist, right? And she went on, and she was living in a very provincial New Jersey town, and best expectation for her was to be a teacher. So she took the very few dollars she had and said, I'm going to Manhattan and not looking back. She lost the $20 in the bus station somewhere, and she was ready to call her mother to go back. As she went in the phone booth to call her mother, she found $20 there. It wasn't hers, and so to her, that was the calling. That was the universe calling to her, and I think we all have those moments, not just about writing, but about other things.
Right, and we kind of associate meaning to things, I guess.
Yeah, I mean,
not
maybe
that it's necessarily a bad thing. It's
not at all. No, I'm not saying it is.
No,
but
neither am I. I'm just saying it is.
Yeah. Right.
Absolutely, and so particularly, would you say that are there any, would you say that you met your wife? Let's talk about her for a second.
Okay.
Did you how was that it's like, would you suggest that start that's a wise move that's like, oh, I'm going to meet a wife, I'm going to get a wife by starting a process with someone? Would you say
no,
that
actually that wasn't the case.
Oh, because
once I met my wife, who was interested in poetry, then we started a magazine. She was there encouraging me, or she's encouraged me for many years, and we had the same sort of sensibility, and so she's been an integral part of it. I wasn't necessarily going around. Well, I mean, I guess I was. I wanted someone who was interested in what I was interested.
Absolutely, and now have this conversation. And
I didn't do it. I didn't do it to get girls, but
right.
I did get a girl because of our common interest in poetry.
Absolutely. So that's for get a girl, find someone with common
my poetry never got me any girls.
Okay. So yeah, and so we, with regard to of sensibilities, it's also great to find individuals with different and counterpart sensibilities as well, so you can grow with your craft. And have you found that in particular that I'm going to jump around here. I'm going to change the questioning completely. I'm not going to know what I'm going to do. I'm curious about, let's say there's somebody that says, how do you get your stuff out in a different university? How did you, when you first got that, when that first happened, your collection stored, put to in the first place, the first university, did you have a big smile?
What do you mean placed in the? What do you mean placed in the?
When it was housed, one of your collections or your works was housed in particular. How did that? when you
Well, I'll
first,
tell you, when I got into the when they started a collection for me at University of Buffalo, I felt very, I finally, I felt, because I've been doing this years, and I said
you
that
felt like you
that's sort of
arrived?
that's sort of a recognition, and then also Harvard has a lot of my taped interviews, and so that's very gratifying, and UMass Boston. So
Yeah.
that that was that was
And have
good.
you found that any, students have, or individuals have like, hey, I was listening to this. I've never heard of this before. Wow, this is great. And contacted you. Have you ever had?
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't happen
And
every day, but every once in a while, someone does.
yeah, and that's, have you found that that's been, you've then been like, oh yeah, and maybe I'll have you on Ibbetson Street Press or something.
Oh yeah. I publish people I've known, who I've met, and they have good poetry. I'm always looking for it. My newspaper column also.
That's the
I
lyrical.
yeah, lyrical Somerville. I published for like 20 years. I've been, doing that. So yeah.
So tell me about what led to that. What led to that particular?
Well, I just, one thing led to the other. I mean, I started the magazine, and then I thought, well, how do I get more attention? Well, I mean, I had all these, I had all these ideas. I was kind of confused. I worked in a mental hospital for 37 years, and when I was starting out of college, I wanted to be a journalist, but I never followed through. I didn't know if I wanted to be a lawyer, but I became a paralegal.
My father's a lawyer.
Everything, what's that?
Yeah,
Everything was para.
Yeah, that whole spiel,
Yeah. And so, but there were a lot of things I wanted to do, and definitely I wanted to be a journalist, but I never. So I became a community journalist, and that gives you a name, so you're known more in the community, and the more you know more people through publishing. And then I did a TV show. That was another outlet, and I just thought of the whole thing as a grassroots effort, and to involve more people and enrich my life. It doesn't enrich me monetarily, but Huh?
Yeah, and enrich others, because community building is also important, and it's something that you find poetry, community, certain things, there's a coming together. You also find that when there are certain political movements or different protests or whatnot, you find that there's poetry, it ties together. And I think there's something going on with this. And I don't know, I know it's in the pandemic and times of COVID, but I noticed that in talking with individuals, do you think that before that there was an uptick of people gathering, let's say, for let's say go to Starbucks, or not Starbucks, but mom and pop coffee shops or certain things, and gathering, that there's been an uptick. There was an uptick in that.
I don't know if there was an uptick. I think Boston has always been a very literary community. I don't know if they were meeting in coffee shops and stuff like that, formally. But I did notice that there are some that cropped up around the same time. There was a Carpenter Poets and things like that. But I don't think I started a movement or anything. I think that,
You didn't? Oh, I read about it in in Lyrical Somerville.
That's right. I started
by Doug. Yeah, I'm
right.
Pretty,
No.
That might be fake news.
But I've always loved, the old Eliot saying, "I measured my life in coffee spoons." For me,
it's teaspoons.
Yeah, and so I've always been a patron of coffee shops. I write there, and I eat there, and now I miss it dearly because I can't.
Yeah, you don't know who you're going to meet, and that's the thing. You might meet somebody. I once went on I live out in Santa Monica, Venice area, and I once, the week I moved or something out here, not too long ago, earlier this year before pandemic and everything, I ended up, we're going on a walk. I ended up, having tacos with some person who does this giant bike thing that everybody gets together and just goes on a bike ride every Saturday with all these lights and everything. And then this other dude who happened to be, we were talking, that has, does publish for scientific textbooks. and things. And then on the way back, walking back from that, after, getting a gluten-free, dairy-free ice cream, you go and you meet, the local rabbi person.
Well, that's a very interesting thing. That's what's so important, I think, to writers. And actually, another great book I'd recommend is Walker in the City, by I think the same author I mentioned. But walking is the way to get out there. It's a great meditative practice, and then you see different things, and it clears the head. I think it's one of the greatest.
Where's your walk?
Well, I usually walk. I'm a big walker. I walk around the Boston Harbor. I walk through Harvard Yard, through Somerville, through Boston when I'm really ambitious, along the Charles River. I can go 5-6 miles walking with no problem.
And will you at all during how as the pandemic has greatly affected
Well,
that?
I mean, I'm there with my mask.
So I
keep my distance.
Get out and maybe even bring something to write or whatnot, or computer, or do you use a typewriter or what?
Yeah, I usually go out and I don't bring a computer, but I go out and read books. I am going to be teaching online this spring, so I've been reading a lot of books for the course. And also, the bagel bars meet 2 or 3 people, small groups, distant with masks.
Of course.
Once a week when the weather's nice. I mean, right now it's 75 in the Boston area. Before we had snow, so I mean it's really wild weather. So whenever weather permits, yeah.
Whenever weather permits, whether it permits. Good weather.
Right.
Yeah. And so I wonder, do you happen to have a piece about your walks?
Let me check.
Or composed, like inspired by being out and about on one of those?
Yeah, I might. An early poem.
Would you walk us away with your words? But so listeners or viewers, get ready to walk. But after this episode.
Okay. So went down Boylston Street. Boylston's a big street in Boston, because I wrote about that. It blew the cafe's umbrella aloft. The rarefied advertisement on the brim splayed on the concrete, destroying any pretensions. Their droll flap in the languid breeze. Just moments ago, pedestrians, cool silk shorts, ballooned like bombastic clowns, distorting the hard-earned symmetry of their polished bodies. The wind pushed along the intolerant of fashionable posturing, breaking their elegant gaits to halting shuffles. Now they stood braced for another bout, but it would not give them the satisfaction. So that was a simple scene while walking down Boylston Street.
I don't think that's just a simple scene. Maybe I'm reading into things a bit much. I tend to do that. But Doug, I see that also from the Josh lens. I see it. That's the new miniseries, the Josh lens. Just joshing along. I see that also as a political thing, as looking at ways that kind of break away. There are different things that, there's a wind that's blown. There are certain things that, for example, I guess there were a lot less of individuals that might not know, wow, this country is incredibly racist. There's a lot of racists that are still here, anti-Semites going on of certain things, and the wind blows. You're aware. Yeah. And then you even have let's say, talking about, I was in a park in Hotchkiss Park. It's one of the parks in Santa Monica. There are many. Mm-hmm. And I remember hearing a conversation of someone of, this individual who I guess who is as they term it, woke, liberal Democrat, kind of saying some things that seem somewhat ignorant. And oh, wow, what's going on there? And you see more of this, of that, the wind blows again, and you find that things are, what was it? You said less symmetrical. That what was the particular phrase? It was symmetry. It was
let's see.
that was a
Hard-earned symmetry. They lost their hard-earned
distorting,
symmetry.
and then it also goes back to sometimes things are messy and things aren't always symmetrical or whatnot. It's think life is messy, and sometimes the wind blows. So I take that. I don't take that just as a simple scene. I see a lot of.
Well, it's no. I mean, that's the whole beauty of things. The novice poet, as I tell my creative writing students, is going to write about his soul. The first thing he's going to write about his soul, or he feels he has to go on top of a mountaintop. But actually, if you start, as William Carlos Williams said, not in ideas, but in things. If you start with a thing, something solid, and then radiate out to something more abstract, you'll have a better poem than if it's all just, you start out with abstractions. The soul is a huge word.
Yeah, and you can describe a soul without saying soul. You can describe the elements of what does it evoke.
Give us something concrete. Yeah. So it's not a simple. It is a simple. It is a simple scene, but in every simple scene is a profound truth. And
that's what's beautiful, I think, also with our lives. And so, would you tell us about a time when the wind blew for you?
Well, I think it was in a poem, actually. You have too much to drink. Let's say you're at a party, you think you're charming.
Oh, let me have some more water.
And you think you're charming, and the words come out like, according to you think, like pearls, and the women's eyes are on you, and then you go in the bathroom mirror and realize you're a joke, a clown, things like that. You realize that you were what you thought was a smooth performance actually was pitiful.
Yeah, happens to me all the time. No, but it happens, and that's the thing. It's a smoothly pitiful, which is a great title for a poem, by the way. Or smooth pity, the suave hit.
It's like a bitch slap, Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't want to offend any women, but it's an old term called that.
No.
And but it's sort of cold butt of a 45 and slap of a hand, something like that across your face.
Right. Absolutely. So, Doug, I wonder, would you engage with me? Would you go into a time machine with me and slap me into a mausoleum of smooth, suave, pitiful pity as we walk and find our own wind and blow it out our ears, and that scene that comes out ends up being the OTSCP on the spot collaborative poem? Would you?
Okay, so you want me to, this is the book thing, right?
That's right, yes. I told you there would be a bizarre intro, and was that bizarre enough?
It was totally incomprehensible. But no, I'm joking with you.
So,
you want me to go in these books here?
Yeah, and so the first thing, Doug, that I'd like you to do, and so I'll just do this, might as well. I'll just do this. The first thing, let me just go back to regular for a second. Would you first share the authors and the titles of each book and page numbers you have for us today?
Okay, the first book is actually a book by someone we published, by Rosie Rosenwig, Bring Me Into the Flesh. And I'm on page 38 and 39. And the second book is The Outlaw Bible of American Essays by Alan Kaufman. And I'm on page 126 and 127, Eldridge Cleaver. And the third book of poems is by Harvey Shapiro, National Cold Storage Company on page 30 and 31.
Terrific. So it's a recent book of David Duffy, and it is Eastern Star, that's published with Adelaide Books. And I have it out to pages 32 and 33. I believe that the particular poem it's out to it's the last 2 pages of The Drift of Context. Hopefully that'll be a good wind blow. I have Brian Sonia Wallace. This is with Harper Collins. It's recent from this year, and it's The Poetry of Strangers. And both David and Brian were actually on as well, our friends of the Assiduous podcast, and it's out to pages 196, 197. And then I have Weed, Adventures of a Dope Smuggler by Jerry Comstra. I have that out to pages 256 and 257. And then I have out is Sylvia Plath, speaking of Aria, and that's the restored edition. It's nice, you have the facsimiles there, and I have it out to 70 and 71. So it's the last page of the last 2 stanzas of Letter in November. And then I have the, the first page of Amnesiac. And that's what I have it out to.
Okay.
So for listeners and viewers, the name of the game, wherever our eyes go, we kind of say, so I say one word and then another, and boop, 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 and we go back and forth. And we go back and forth between Doug and I, and it either becomes a masterpiece or a masterpiece. Let's see. Doug, would you like to start us off?
Okay. My first shrink. You want more than that, or from all 3 books?
Do you want it?
Yeah.
More?
Okay. Oh no, that's fine. My first shrink. That's fine.
Okay. In California, evangelical house.
Political power growing out of the barrel of a gun.
Our cross stream of sympathy, childhood actions feels my end.
To this place, to the red cliffs.
I stole yesterday from you.
I listed the food both molding and fresh.
In Guatemala, the deeper, the more I, begging.
Hakim Jamal and Sister Betty concealed in their midst.
From precision, voice automatic, a minute sister.
Cheerful on his own deathbed. Yeah.
His young high of citizens confides a decade down.
I stood outside on the steps of ramparts.
No sides rushing, elucidation where we play.
A man on a low balcony.
Knew no happiness, the book of prison happenings.
I rebuffed his past and read him poetry.
the smell, the lagoon, the weed, fortunately.
Huey P. Newton was standing in the window, shotgun in hand.
A calculated living, we fulfilled the drift, give reasons for nature across the border.
Where did the Jewish God go?
Sparking sperm in prison or in anxiety.
Besting her, my mother-in-law.
I remember raising the state idly, dared to touch corruption deeper.
The library resembled photographs coming out of Cuba.
It was so weird that night, a super size of comet and soup.
Spill whole canfuls on the cliffs of the Jersey Shore.
Already happening, a stream of scents, marijuana outside of the trip.
No more lesbian propositions in the night.
No laughing like a newborn violence in cahoots with activism peaceful. A lot of blue foam and death.
Officer, I want you to arrest this man for assault.
To play soccer in 2015.
Okay. The milkman's horse somewhere on a higher floor.
Smelled a sigh. Read.
I received a phone call from Malcolm X.
Our cultural godhead shaped us.
With my paper raised like an offering.
I assert the context like a stranger.
A warding off of old seducing therapists.
Reasons for who is down, dreams of never in the station to
as dew from the grass.
Closed by a buffet of love.
No more late night tears and confessions.
Yes, deportation. Yes, good or bad.
Squeezing past Bobby Seale and what seemed like a battalion of Panthers.
The sight of a shot with God drove the rig into erased.
The Weston shouts something like, "See there."
Detention. I remember you living in anxiety, protests that broke scenery.
And the fear of West Coast orgies and counter groups and vacation rapes at Big Sur.
Where life is already happening to cover up the all-time fallen.
Political fashion to exert organized force in the political arena.
Buried packages.
The two of us come for the first time.
For the first time, I am
no more 24/7 coverage.
I knew happiness.
We're being invaded. We're being invaded.
On top of
the sun is already up.
Peel the color of scenery. Peel the foam. The town from which I jumped.
Cheerful, oh, I think I said that. Decades later, my first shrink lost his license.
I have dogs.
The policeman seemed infuriated by the answer.
Laughing. I am newborn.
To the light. To the light.
Because our mother's explanations predicted nothing.
It was the decor that lured me.
Begging amnesiac blank with celibate, irreplaceable, dark moo.
While I was in the lobby, a TV cameraman, camera on his shoulder.
It was newborn and calculated.
To this place, to the red cliffs.
The boat of walkie-talkies, the night around babies, hugging a new comet full of reason, headed somehow.
No more Passover Seders in a nut house.
I think that's a good end line.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so
Forward
much,
to see the
Doug.
results.
Absolutely. And any last words, or any?
I am looking forward to being in the Assiduous, the anthology, the Assiduous Dust anthology that you're very ambitiously putting out, and I hope to buy an ad. I am going to buy an ad, and I hope in support of your work, other people will follow.
Absolutely. I hope others will too. You heard Doug says it's worth it, so I guess you should too. Thank you for that plug. And Doug, you have your latest collection. Where can people find that? That's the that's
Well, of course they can find it on Amazon, but we
Doug.
prefer not to. But we prefer not to use Amazon. So
Yeah, Amazon's the
Big Table Books, Big Table Publishing. You can get it there.
Okay, and then you have your various links. Where can people find more of your work or reach out to you? Any shout outs particularly you'd like to make?
I'm sorry. I was distracted. What were you saying?
Oh, any links particularly you'd like to?
Yeah, you can look at my dougholder.blogspot.com or ibbetsonpress.com or stuff like that.
Grooviness. And of course, I'll put those links as well for listeners or viewers who are interested. Thank you so much, Doug, again. It's been a pleasure having you on for Assiduous Dust. And here's to life. L'chaim.
L'chaim. Bye-bye.
Bye.